Welcome to Uncommon Sense, where we do our best to make it common again. I'm your host, Adrian Alquist, and today I have a very special guest with me. I used to say that all the time, and I stopped saying that, but now it's true because we have another Catholic superstar that's not my dad, Joseph Pearce. How are you?
I'm very well, and still dealing with processing the fact that you think I'm a Catholic superstar.
I think you are. Joseph Pearce is another expert on Chesterton. He's also an expert on Tolkien and Shakespeare, and he's a prolific writer. And I mean, it's true. You're a Catholic superstar. So I'm really glad to be with you. Also, Joseph, his story is in My Name is Lazarus, which I've been also promoting for a long time. It's a collection of people whose conversions were inspired by G.K. Chesterton, at least partly. And Joseph has just an intense story, and I want to talk about it. I remember you coming to Chesterton Academy in the Twin Cities when I was there, and you told the story when I was a student. And I kind of want to hit a lot of those points when I'm talking to you today. So yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah, well, I mean, the bottom line, the 30-second version, which you can then ask further questions about, is that at the age of 15, I was drawn into radical politics, particularly the politics of neo-Nazism. I became a member of an organization called the National Front in England in 1976 when I was 15, and was involved in that organization for the next 11 years.
That's why you have an intense story, by the way. If it wasn't clear, that's why it's intense.
And as I say, that it was largely thanks to G.K. Chesterton that I escaped that world of darkness.
Which is an amazing thing. I mean, but of course, Chesterton is racist, right?
Well, yeah. Evidently, the whole point is that he saved me from racism. I'll let that speak for itself.
Yeah, that's great. So I remember you telling me about the motto of your school. I don't remember which school it was, but do you remember what I'm talking about?
Yes. So I went to a very poor, unlike the Chesterton Academies, of course, which are marvelous. I went to a very poor, what you would call in America, a public school in East London. So it's the wrong side of the tracks in London, if you like. And I actually read something fairly recently in the last 10 years that the school district in which that school was, where I was educated, was the worst school district in the whole of England. And that the particular school I went to, which is called Eastbury Comprehensive, was the worst performing school in that worst school district. So I have a legitimate claim to have gone to the worst school in England, which is pretty good, really. I'm quite proud of that in a perverse sort of way. And perhaps the bad thing about this school is epitomized by its motto. So the motto, which was emblazoned above the stage in the auditorium, were the words, "This above all, to thine own self be true." And then it said, William Shakespeare. And my father, for my father, the greatest Englishman who ever lived was William Shakespeare. So I sort of learned my Shakespeare at my father's knee, so to speak. And I thought, well, if William Shakespeare said that, that's good enough for me. And of course, those words are words of effectively radical relativism, right? This above all to thine own self be true means, the only thing that really matters is as long as you have your own truth and you're true to it, nothing else really matters.
But it's Shakespeare, right, Joseph?
It's Shakespeare. But, it took me years. And so I took that personal motto, actually. I became a moral relativist, largely on the strength of that. But it took me years to realize that Shakespeare never actually said that. No, Shakespeare wrote that, but he wrote it to be put into the mouth of Polonius in Hamlet, who is a blithering idiot and a villain. So to say that that's Shakespeare's position when he puts it in the mouth of someone who basically, by following that philosophy, gets himself killed, is absurd, and it shows the absurdity of my school's understanding both of philosophy and Shakespeare, that they should have adopted that as their motto.
That kills me that they had the worst proofreading ever, or checking your sources.
It's that what chance do we have as students, as teenagers in that high school, when you're led by people that are so ignorant?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's what I wanted to hit because it's amazing. But so now let's move into your propaganda days, and that led way into the kind of neo-Nazi group that you were involved in, right?
Yeah, so at the age of 15, I joined this organization, and at the age of 16, in 1977, I founded a magazine called Bulldog, which became the national newspaper of the Young National Front, so the National Front's youth movement, of which I became chairman. I sometimes called it the biggest gang in England at the time, which it probably was. And uh, for editing that magazine, I actually was sentenced to prison on two separate occasions. Once in 1982, and in fact, last week was the, get this right now, the 39th anniversary of my going to prison for the January the 12th, 1982. So I spent my 21st birthday in prison, and then also for editing the same magazine, I was sent to a longer prison sentence. First sentence was 6 months, the second sentence was 12 months, and that was in December 1985. So I spent my 21st and my 25th birthdays in prison.
Wow, wow. And how was that? I'm loaded
Well, I
question.
mean, the
Yeah.
first time it was actually not easy or pleasant, of course not. But I consider myself to be a political prisoner. I consider myself to be a prisoner of war. I consider myself to be a political soldier. So I sort of used my gym, the bunk bed in my gym, like a bench press, got underneath it and did my bench press, and basically went to the gym, got myself in shape, wrote some political propaganda stuff which I smuggled out. So, if you see yourself as a martyr, which I did during that first prison sentence, it's relatively easy, because you feel self-righteous,
Yeah.
Whereas the second prison sentence, at the beginning of the second prison sentence, I remember thinking, this is crazy. I'm now going to serve a 12-month prison sentence for something I don't even believe in any longer. I'd been living a lie for a while, largely because of the influence of Chesterton and Chesterton's ideas and Belloc, putting these other ideas in my mind that were much healthier, including an attraction to the Catholic faith. And so I went to prison thinking I've been living a lie now for months and months, going through the motions as a neo-Nazi, and I don't believe it. Now, under those circumstances, the second prison sentence was much more difficult because I just crazy. What am I doing here for something I don't even believe in? So really, the dynamism of the conversion story, if you like, is what happens or what happened between those two prison sentences.
That's great. Yeah. And wow. Oh, can I ask? This is unrelated, but how much can you bench press?
Well, up until about 9 months ago, 355 pounds. What about you?
355 pounds. That's pretty
Yeah.
good. My max was around 240, but
Okay.
but
But
that's
basically, I
amazing.
started. You begin to show your age, and I'm almost 60. And about 6 months ago, I started to get not serious, but concerning rotator cuff issues in both
Yeah, no
shoulders.
kidding.
And so when I start doing heavy weights on the bench press, I can feel it. And I thought, well, if I just ignore it, I'm going to put them out all together and I won't be able to work out at all. So I have to step back. So now I'm not doing the bench so much. I'm actually doing dumbbell presses.
Yeah.
And you can't go as heavy with a dumbbell press if you have, unless you have people working out with you, because you can't lift up a 150-pound dumbbell or two of them,
Yeah.
and then get them in position without doing yourself injury with all the moving around.
Yeah.
So I'm having to go lighter. So I'm now doing lighter weight and more reps. So
Nice.
that was a tangential question which led to a tangent.
Yeah, yeah. Only on Uncommon Sense can you learn trivia facts like this.
It's not the question I get asked very often, but I was pleased to answer it.
Okay, good. I'm glad. Okay, so moving back. Sorry to take the wind out of your story. So you were going through this conversion experience. What finally did it, or what were the next steps you took? After you got out of prison, for example.
Well, actually, obviously reading Chesterton was a significant milestone. Several of his books, Orthodoxy, obviously, The Everlasting Man, Catholic Church Conversion, and this all happened between the two most of it between the two prison sentences, some of it afterwards. But the key thing for me was I found myself at the second day of the second prison sentence, so that would be December the 13th, 1985,
Hmm.
clutching some rosary beads in my hand in my cell with a 12-month prison sentence ahead of me. And I knew what rosary beads were because they, we used to sing anti-Catholic songs about no nuns and no priests and no rosary beads. My dad used to call Catholics bead rattlers, so I knew what rosary beads were, but of course I never prayed them. And I don't know how I got these rosary beads. It's a mystery to me. I'm not saying they fell like manna from heaven, but I just literally do not know how I had them. But I had these rosary beads, and I had a great desire to pray the rosary for the first time. And there was a problem because, I didn't know the Hail Mary or the Glory Be or the Apostles' Creed or any of the mysteries. And I had been taught the Our Father when I was a small child, but had forgotten it. So there was no way I could pray the rosary formally, according to its form.
Mm-hmm.
But I began to basically mumble inarticulate prayers and fumble the beads. And this was the first time I'd ever prayed. And so this opened a conversation, which also opened a channel of grace. So what began to pour in at that time was a great desire for conversion and healing, which I didn't really recognize until later, that healing began to happen, particularly the healing of the hatred that I had inside me as a neo-Nazi and a racist. And I started to go to mass during that second prison sentence. And then when I got out of prison, I knew I had to make a complete clean break with everybody I knew, basically, because I'd lived in this neo-Nazi ghetto for 11 years. And I needed to just turn my back on that, which was I had to sort of head out on my own without any friends. So I moved to an agricultural backwater in England, Norfolk, and started a new life there, which included a year or so later being received into the church.
Wow. Was that hard to do, to just say goodbye to your friends, or was it did it become apparent to you, what kind of group it was, and was it easy?
Well, I had good friends, and in fact, there's one or two of them I'm still in touch with, and they've made the journey. They're not Catholics, but they've moved away from that hatred. And so it's good to have friends that you can share the old times, even if that's not necessarily always good times. But I knew that I needed to get away from those ideas and that world of hatred. And of course I didn't. It was difficult to break with certain friends. I mean, it would be odd if I could be so detached from friendship, I could just walk away. But
you knew you needed.
But the point is, I knew I needed to do that, and I needed to start afresh. And so it was a necessity at that point in my life, basically.
Wow, yeah. And so you were received into the Catholic Church a year later. And when did you start writing for, when did you start writing things that were very, very much Catholic at heart?
Yeah, I just, in case you hear some strange noise in the background, I did warn you I've got the window open because it's been actually amazingly warm here considering the time of year. I haven't heard the rooster yet, but I can hear the ducks quacking. Okay. Just in case your listeners are thinking, what strange noises are going on there? Yeah. I don't think it's anything to do with me. Okay, so so it's the ducks. Yeah. But yeah, basically, I've always been a writer. That's sort of clear from the fact that I started this magazine when I was 16. But my first book as a Catholic, actually, it's never been published. I don't normally speak about this either. This is another exclusive for Uncommon Sense. I might have mentioned it in my book, Race with the Devil. I can't remember. But I actually wrote a biography of Otto Strasser, who was an anti-Nazi Nazi, in the sense that he was in the Nazi party, but realized Hitler was basically pathological and anti-Semitic to the point of madness. And he formed, for want of a better word, a secret society within the Nazi party called the Schwarz Front, the Black Front. And he was a great inspiration of mine because his political ideas and those of his brothers, one was a Benedictine monk, one was a Nazi who was killed by Hitler in the Night of the Long Knives, is very attuned to Catholic social teaching, in fact, or what Chesterton called distributism. So as part of my journey, of course, it was Chesterton's distributism that first attracted me. I was much more interested in Chesterton's politics than his religion at first. So this Otto Strasser was someone that got me away from Nazism because he was anti-Hitler, and you could sort of be in that Nazi tradition but not be a Hitlerite. And so I wrote a book about him, which has never been published. Who knows what will ever happen to that?
Yeah,
but then the first book after that, which I began probably very early in the 1990s, was my biography of Chesterton. And because I had a full-time job, a 9-to-5 job at the time, I had to write that research it and write it in the evenings and weekends. So it took me 5 years of research and writing to write that book. And so when Hodder & Stoughton in the UK gave me a contract to publish it, I had to make a choice of either take the money and just be rich for a year and have a good holiday on the advance, or give up the day job and try to write another book and get that published before the money ran out. And I chose the latter path and became a full-time writer. And that was obviously a life-changing and life-defining decision on my part, which by the grace of God worked out well.
And you had at least writing experience from writing for the Bulldog, but now you're writing on pretty opposite things later, right?
Exactly. So the writing is a gift. It's in the gospel, you have one talent or two talents. I don't want to boast I have 5 talents, but I'm useless at most things, as my wife will tell you. But there are some things that I excel at, and obviously writing is something that comes naturally to me. So I was not going to stop writing. It's just that once my orientation had changed towards Christ. Now those gifts that Christ had actually given me, which I'd abused, if you like, thrown like pearls to swine in the days when I was a propagandist for the National Front, I now began to use, hopefully, and please God, to his greater glory and to bring people to him.
That's great. I actually have a question. I mean, we joked about it, but what do you say to people who do accuse the church of being racist or classist or any one of these insults lobbed at the church or at Catholicism? What do you say to that?
Well, the big problem is that this all derives from an Hegelian and Marxist understanding of history, whereas history is about mechanisms, not about people. So that's why the modern left can talk about systemic racism. Everybody until this term was coined relatively recently saw racism as a sin, as something which you're personally afflicted by, for whatever reason, and you impose those views upon others. It's something which is, you could say you're a racist as an individual. But now we're all racist, whether we like it or not, because of the color of our skin, which is, of course, from the older understanding of racism, a racist position, right? Judging someone and calling someone something purely because of something they can't help being, their skin color. That's the whole point about racism: is you blame you stereotype someone because of something that they completely have no control over, their skin color. So the whole idea of systemic racism is a racist idea that white people are guilty because they're white, regardless of when you were born. So what I say is that my parents. I have no blue blood in my. I'm as common as muck, as far back as you want to go, I think. Yeah. So it's very probably I have ancestors who were working in factories for 15, 16 hours a day. May well have children that were sent up chimneys or working in factories. During the Industrial Revolution, they were wage slaves. That's my background. I'm not responsible for the British Empire. I'm not responsible for the slave trade, and to somehow to sort of say that because of the color of my skin, I'm to blame with everybody that has the same skin color as I do is absurd. And we need to get back to racism as something that you can say from what someone does, right? The way what you've just done or what you've just said is racist. It is something which is a sin. That a person, because sins are personal, right? Not systemic. A mechanism cannot sin. A system cannot sin. A person can sin. Racism is a sin, not a mechanism. So the whole idea of systemic racism is nonsense.
Right. Yeah, and it's because of our Catholic, teachings that we can say everyone is made in the image and likeness of God. So we have that base understanding that we can argue why racism.
The Catholic position on the dignity of the human person is the only defense against racism.
Yeah.
I, as a Christian, as a Catholic, I'm not allowed to see another human person as inferior to me, whether it's because of the color of their skin, or because they have Down syndrome, or multiple sclerosis, or because they're unborn. You know, the whole idea of the dignity of the human person is that I have to see them as my equals, not as someone that I can use and abuse.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Thank you for answering that. Okay. So shifting gears a little bit, I have another question because we have a limited amount of time. You've written about Shakespeare, and can you tell me how? I mean, I know your previous school had the Shakespeare motto, but how did he become more of a center of focus in your life? And what I want to ask about is Catholicism, which is kind of a spoiler. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I grew up with Shakespeare, as I said. I sort of learned Shakespeare at my father's knee. My father could quote swathes, whole speeches from Shakespeare. And so I grew up with that, literally, for as far back as I can remember. So Shakespeare's always been a hero, but I never believed he was Catholic. And even after I became a Catholic, I didn't believe he was Catholic. And when I came to the United States, I had a colleague on the faculty, literature faculty at Ave Maria. College as it then was, university as it became, who said that Shakespeare was a Catholic. And I just said to him, that's just wishful thinking. You know, we don't know that. We can't know that because we don't know enough about Shakespeare. And my position was that, you know, Shakespeare is someone, it's like a 1,000-word jigsaw puzzle, and we only have 15 pieces. Now, if you only have 15 pieces of the puzzle, you can't have any idea of the picture. Right. So I'm saying that's what Shakespeare, we don't know who he was, right? But then, you know, over a period of time, I began to sort of find other pieces of the puzzle, you know, and then you get to a certain position, when you get enough pieces of the puzzle, you get, well, you know, there might be something in this. And then you get curious, and then you start looking for pieces of the puzzle. And that's when my research into the Catholic Shakespeare began. And it became very clear and abundantly obvious that you can prove Shakespeare's Catholicism in two ways. Biographically, from the facts of his life, and textually from the works that he wrote. And those two things together come together like a Gothic arch where one supports the other. And I would argue, and I'm happy and willing to argue with anybody who wants to argue with me, that you can prove this. It's like a court of law. You can't prove it absolutely, but you can prove it beyond reasonable doubt.
Cool. Wow. Yeah. And I mean, I've read Shakespeare. I got to be in Macbeth my senior year, and there are absolutely Catholic elements in that. It would be surprising if he wasn't in it, but this was at the time of the Protestant persecution, the Elizabethan persecution around that time, right?
Well, this is the problem, and this is why there's this mystery, because if you're a Catholic in England in the reign of Queen Elizabeth and James I, which was Shakespeare's time,
right? Okay,
there's no paper trail. Because it's illegal to be it's punishable by death to be a priest in England. It's punishable by death to harbor a priest in England. It's punishable by huge fines or imprisonment or exile to go to Catholic mass or to have Catholic objects in your house. So there's no paper trail. It's like being in the Soviet Union under communism. You know, if you're living a dissident life and you're doing things that are against the system, you're not writing about it and sending letters to each other because it's deadly. Right. So the point is, the whole point of that is there's a lack of documentary evidence, because if living under such persecution, you didn't leave documents.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, cool. Well, yeah, you've written on Shakespeare, so I would suggest first, if you're curious about this, go and look at what you've written. And you also had this series on EWTN, The Quest for Shakespeare, right?
Yeah, I did two series actually, based upon my first two books on Shakespeare. I've written 3 books on Shakespeare. So we had a 13-part series based upon The Quest for Shakespeare, which was the biographical evidence, my first book. Then we had another series based upon my second book, Through Shakespeare's Eyes, which looks at the evidence from the plays. So we did 2 13-part series for EWTN, which I'm sure you can get from the EWTN catalog.
Yeah. And I'll take this opportunity to plug some more stuff. Joseph has a website, jpearce.com, CO, I think it is, right?
Correct.
Yes. Okay. Gotcha.
Not com, co.
.co, and I'll put it in the YouTube description as well. But you can go there and look at all of Joseph Pearce stuff. You can become part of his inner sanctum, and he has a lot of material, great content. So, some of which is on Tolkien, which is a nice segue into one of my last questions for you. You don't have to talk about this forever, but I know you're an expert on Tolkien as well. And what draws you to Tolkien?
Well, again, I actually was a late starter on Tolkien. I didn't read Tolkien as a child like many people do. The first time I'd meant to read Tolkien during my youth. And actually, the first time I read Tolkien was during the second prison sentence.
Okay.
And I always looked, when I was started to read Chesterton and Belloc and C.S. Lewis, and I'm now interested in the sort of the Catholic world. I always looked at the Lord of the Rings, and it's sort of that thick, and you think, well, yeah, I do need to read it, but not yet. Manana. And then I found myself in solitary confinement at the beginning of a 12-month prison sentence. Hey, the thicker the better at that point, right? So I read the Lord of the Rings then during the beginning of that second prison sentence, and it was, again, a significant path on my conversion. I didn't get all of the Catholic elements when I first read it. I mean, Tolkien's very subtle. It's not in your face.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, it was about 10 years after that, in 1997, when Tolkien was voted, Lord of the Rings was voted as the greatest work of the 20th century. And all the literary establishment was so up in arms at this, and really dismissive in a juvenile, infantile way. In a way, it's quite clear that they hadn't even read the book. They're just passing judgment on the basis of prejudice, pride and prejudice, right? So I thought, well, I'm going to take them on. You provoke me and I respond, right?
Yeah.
So I wrote my book Tolkien, Man and Myth as a response to that belligerence and ignorance on the part of the critics, and it showed that the key thing is that Tolkien said, and I always quote him verbatim because this is the foundation upon everything else.
Mm-hmm.
Tolkien said, quote, "The Lord of the Rings is, of course, a fundamentally religious and Catholic work." So the point is, if the author says that, then our job is to find out how.
Yeah, that makes sense. Wow, that's cool. Well, that's all I had. A question on Tolkien. We could probably talk a lot more on that, but we're probably coming short on our time. I have one more question, and it has to do with the fact that you interviewed Solzhenitsyn, right?
Yeah, one of the great honors of my life. I can't think of many greater honors. Was I went to Moscow in, I think it was 1998, to interview Alexander Solzhenitsyn. There's a story behind this. Again, for those that don't, the younger generation, mere whippersnappers like you, Adrian, it's difficult to understand how huge Solzhenitsyn was in the 1960s and 70s.
Yeah, can you actually let's assume that some people actually haven't heard of Solzhenitsyn or don't know the details of who he is. Can you give a 2-sentence summary of what the deal is?
Well, that's exactly what I was about to do.
Actually. Oh, sorry. Okay, there you go.
That's okay. It's okay. But that's why I was saying that for youngsters, that they may not know who Solzhenitsyn is.
Mm-hmm.
But if you grew up in the 60s and 70s, as I did, he was so well known that, it's like Elvis Presley, that you don't need a caption under the picture. You see the picture and you know that's Elvis. But you see a picture now with a man with the high brow, high forehead and slightly receding hair and the beard and the long face. You knew it was Solzhenitsyn. It's just, you didn't actually have to have a caption. He was globally known.
Right.
So, and he was known basically as someone who had the courage to expose the Soviet Union in various works, including One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich and also the Gulag Archipelago.
Mm-hmm.
And he exposed the Soviet Union and he became a million seller in the West at the time of the Cold War and helped to undermine the Soviet Union. So basically, if you want to know who are the major figures in bringing down the Soviet Union it would be St. John Paul II, Ronald Reagan. But after that, it would be certainly Alexander Solzhenitsyn, because his works exposing the evil of communism, and the millions of people killed by communism, and the millions more that were enslaved in work camps by communism, undermined its moral position and turned people against it. So, he was a hero of mine. And so I wrote to him and said that I'd like to write a biography of him, because I didn't feel that any of the previous biographies had paid due attention to his orthodoxy, to Russian Orthodoxy, to the centrality of his Christian faith, to his life. And so I wasn't expecting to get a reply, but he replied and said, yes, come to Moscow, and gave me the contact details of two of his sons who speak fluent English. And I thought, why me? Because Solzhenitsyn had refused to speak to any Western writer for years because they treated him so appallingly. Wow. And I said, well, who am I? Because at the time, I'd only had one book published, and that was my biography of Chesterton. So I thought, well, obviously he agrees about needing to have a Christian understanding of who he is. Yeah. But I still thought, well, why me? I mean, there are plenty of Christian writers out there. And when I arrived in Moscow, before he came down to see me in his house in Moscow, his wife took me to a different room and showed me, pointed to the top shelf in this room, and it was the Ignatius Press collected works of G.K. Chesterton.
There it is, yeah.
Right? She made a point of showing me that, which means that the magic word that got me a ticket to Moscow to see Solzhenitsyn was the word Chesterton, because obviously Solzhenitsyn was an admirer of G.K. Chesterton.
Yeah, there you go. If Jordan Peterson ever watches this, probably not going to happen, but that's what I want him to know, because he's a huge fan. He always quotes Solzhenitsyn.
I know. I've noticed that actually since Jordan Peterson started advocating Solzhenitsyn, and as he should, that the sales of my book of Solzhenitsyn has picked up radically. So in terms of putting food on the table for me and my family, I have to thank Jordan Peterson for that.
That's awesome. Okay, that's good. Nice. I love that story of him having the collected works of Chesterton. Yeah. Well, there you go. That's all my questions for now. We'll have to have you on again, because it seems like you've lived multiple lives at this point.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a joy. I love working with you folks. The Society of G.K. Chesterton is one of the beacons of light out there, and I'm always happy to be involved. So just be in touch whenever, and I'll happily come back on again.
Thank you so much for being on with me, Joseph Pearce. Thank you. It was a pleasure. And
my pleasure, Adrian. Thanks for having me, and keep up the great work.
Thank you. And everyone, thank you for listening. Until next time, help us to make uncommon sense more common.